Roland Williams was 40 years old, made $63,000 a year as the foreman of his own auto body shop. And the most important words his father ever spoke to him were a warning he chose to ignore. He stood now in the suffocating silence of his father's empty house in West End, a small brick bungalow that smelled of old spice and dust. Marcus Williams had been gone for 2 weeks, felled by a heart attack that was as swift as it was merciless. The funeral was over. The last of the well-meaning aunts and cousins had gone home, and Roland was left with the hollow task of sorting through a life neatly packed into boxes and drawers. He ran a hand over his neatly groomed fade, the gesture automatic, a way to ground himself when the world felt unsteady. His father, a retired paralegal for a downtown firm, had been a man of quiet precision. Everything in his life had a place, a reason, and his words, though few, were always weighed. The memory echoed in the quiet room, as clear as if Marcus were standing right there, his deep voice calm and certain. It was 6 years ago, just after Roland's wedding. They were on this very porch watching the sun set behind the trees. Marcus had taken a slow sip of his sweet tea. "I watched her mother, Bernice," he'd said, not looking at Roland but out at the street. "I watched what she did to her first husband, stripped him clean. A woman learns from her mother, son. Tamika will do the same to you." Roland had laughed it off then, a dismissive, slightly offended chuckle. "It's not like that, Dad. Tamika's different, and Bernice is, well, she's a character, but she's not a monster." His father had finally turned to him, his eyes holding a deep, sorrowful wisdom that Roland, in his newlywed bliss, couldn't comprehend. "She's not a monster," Marcus agreed softly. "Monsters are obvious. She's just a predator, and she taught her daughter how to hunt." Roland had shaken his head, full of the kind of certainty only a man in love can possess. He loved Tamika. He loved her bright, ambitious energy, the way she filled a room. He loved the life they were building, or so he thought. He had his shop, Williams Autocraft, a business he'd built from the ground up with a small inheritance and a decade of 16-hour days. His hands, perpetually stained with grease and paint, were proof of his labor. Tamika was his reward, his motivation. The idea that she could be anything but his partner was unthinkable. It felt like a betrayal even to consider his father's words. Now, standing in the silence of his father's final fortress, the words didn't sound like a cynical warning. They sounded like a prophecy. Over the past few years, a gnawing unease had settled deep in his gut, a feeling he could never quite name. It was in the casual way Tamika dismissed his concerns about the shop's finances, the way her eyes would glaze over when he talked about work. It was in the escalating luxury of her life, a life that seemed to run on a completely different financial track than his own. He was the one sanding, welding, and painting, but she was the one living a life that glittered with brands he couldn't pronounce and price tags that made his stomach clench. He had pushed the feeling down, attributing it to his own working-class anxieties, his father's ingrained skepticism. He had chosen to believe in the beautiful facade. He had no idea how wrong he was, or how meticulously his father had prepared for the day it would all come crashing down. Do you know that feeling when you suspect something is wrong, but you're too afraid to look? Share your story in the comments below, and let's talk about the power of intuition. The facade of their life was a masterpiece of domestic normalcy, carefully constructed and flawlessly maintained. It was built on the foundation of Roland's labor and decorated with Tamika's aspirations. Their home, a rented 4-bedroom in a pleasant Hoover subdivision, was her canvas. He would come home at 7 p.m., the muscles in his back screaming, the scent of Bondo and clear coat clinging to his clothes. He'd find her on the phone, pacing their living room, a space dominated by a massive pearl-white sectional sofa that had cost a staggering $8,000. "No, Bernice. The caterer from the Junior League Gala was dreadful," she'd say, waving a dismissive hand as if shooing away the memory of subpar canapes. "For your birthday, we need something exquisite. I saw a quote from Hastings. It's $6,000, but for 60 people, that's practically a bargain." Roland would drop his keys, a simple ring with a worn fob for his 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles, into the $350 ceramic bowl on the console table. He'd walk past the $4,000 abstract painting she'd bought at a gallery in Mountain Brook, the one that looked like a paint can had exploded, and head to the kitchen. "Tough day, baby?" she'd ask, her attention still on the phone. "Dinner's in the fridge. I had a lunch meeting that ran late." The lunch meeting was almost always with her mother, Bernice, at a place like Highlands Bar and Grill, where lunch for two could easily top $200. The dinner in the fridge for him was often leftovers from that same lunch, repackaged in Tupperware. He'd heat it up, sit at the $2,500 Granite Island, and eat alone while she finalized plans for a life he felt increasingly disconnected from. One evening, he tried to bridge the gap. He'd just lost a bid for a fleet contract with a local plumbing company because his paint booth was outdated. "Tammy, we really need to talk about investing in a new downdraft booth for the shop. The Garmat 3000 is the industry standard. It's about $45,000, but it would double our capacity for high-end finishes." She finally put her phone down, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "45,000? Roland, we just put the deposit down on the club membership. That was $10,000. She came over and wrapped her arms around his neck, her voice softening into a purr. "The shop is doing fine, honey. You always make it work. You're so good at what you do. Don't stress about it." She kissed his forehead, the scent of her $400 Chanel No. 5 perfume filling his senses. "Besides, Bernice says you shouldn't tie up all your capital in depreciating assets." Bernice. Her mother's name was a constant presence in their home, a third person in their marriage. Bernice lived in a sprawling, 6,000 square foot colonial in the heart of Mountain Brook, a world away from Roland's shop in Ensley. She was a woman who moved through life with the serene confidence of someone who had always had money, even though Roland knew for a fact her first husband had left her with next to nothing. She'd since built a small empire of investments and consulting, vague terms that seemed to produce a constant stream of income. Sunday dinners at Bernice's house were a weekly ritual of quiet humiliation. The table would be set with heavy silverware and crystal glasses. Bernice, always dressed in something flowing and expensive like a $1,500 Etro caftan, would hold court. She'd talk about her portfolio, her trips to Europe, the charming little LLC she was using to acquire a new property. During one such dinner, she'd looked across the table at Roland, who was wearing his best, a clean-pressed shirt and slacks. Her eyes landed on his wrist, on the simple, practical $89 Timex watch his father had given him years ago. A small, pitying smile touched her lips. She subtly flashed her own wrist, adorned with a diamond-encrusted $15,000 Cartier tank watch. "It's so wonderful that you're not concerned with material things, Roland," she said, her voice dripping with condescension disguised as a compliment. "Every family needs a solid foundation, a worker bee to keep the hive running. Tamika is the queen, of course. She has the vision, but vision is nothing without diligent labor." Tamika had laughed, a light, tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mama, don't embarrass him." But she didn't disagree. Roland just nodded, his jaw tight. He felt the familiar burn of resentment, but he swallowed it. For Tamika, he told himself this was just how wealthy people talked. He was the one with the chip on his shoulder, the one who didn't understand their world. He was the man with grease under his fingernails, and they were the women with stock portfolios. They were different species. He worked, they planned. It seemed, on the surface, like a partnership. He built the engine, and they steered the car. What he didn't realize was that they were driving it right off a cliff, with his name on the title, but not on the insurance policy. The outrage didn't accumulate in a single, explosive moment. It was a slow poison, administered in small, daily doses. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, each one seemingly insignificant, that collectively bled his spirit dry. The escalating betrayal was a symphony of casual cruelty, with Tamika and Bernice as its lead conductors. One afternoon, Roland left the shop early, hoping to surprise Tamika. As he walked up the driveway of their home, he heard voices from the back patio. He slowed his steps, the sound of their laughter carrying on the warm afternoon air. It was Tamika and Bernice, lounging by the pristine, unused swimming pool that cost them $800 a month to maintain. The new line of credit came through, Tamika was saying, her voice bright with excitement. Another $50,000. The bank barely even blinked. Bernice let out a low, satisfied hum. Of course not, darling. The shop's revenue stream is solid, consistent, predictable. There was a pause, the clinking of ice in a glass. He's just the wallet, sweetie. Remember that. As long as he keeps his head down, sanding those cars and breathing in paint fumes, we can keep building our real future. He doesn't have the mind for this level of finance anyway. It would just confuse him. I know, Mama, Tamika said, and her sigh was one of weary agreement. It's just, sometimes I feel guilty. Don't be, Bernice said sharply. Guilt is a poor woman's emotion. We are creating an empire. He's a part of that. Whether he understands his role or not, he's comfortable. He has his little shop. What more could a simple man want? Roland stood frozen behind a large oak tree, the keys to his Camry digging into his palm. He's just the wallet, sweetie. The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. A simple man, his little shop. He backed away slowly, his heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He got back in his car and drove, ending up at a small park overlooking the city. He sat there for hours, watching the lights come on as dusk fell, the conversation playing over and over in his head. He tried to rationalize it, to twist it into something else. Maybe they were talking about a hypothetical person. Maybe he'd misheard. But he knew he hadn't. The cold, transactional nature of their words was undeniable. That night, he went home and said nothing. The era of playing dumb had begun, born from a place of deep, gut-wrenching shock. The incidents grew more blatant. The shop's primary paint supplier, a local business Roland had worked with for a decade, called him one Monday morning. Roland, what's going on? The check for last month's invoice bounced. $32,000 worth of materials. Roland felt a cold dread wash over him. He had personally handed the signed check to Tamika to mail over a week ago. He called her immediately. Oh my God, baby, I'm so sorry, she'd gushed, her voice thick with theatrical remorse. It must have gotten lost in the shuffle. With all the planning for our trip to Cancun, my head has been a mess. The trip to Cancun, a $9,000, all-inclusive, 5-star resort vacation, for her and Bernice? He had argued against it, citing the need to build up the shop's cash reserves. She had waved him off. We need a break, Roland. We work hard. We, he thought, but he didn't say it. He spent the rest of the day on the phone apologizing to the supplier, rearranging funds, and trying to salvage his reputation. He managed to fix it, but the stress cost him 2 sleepless nights and the trust of a vendor he'd known for years. Tamika's apology when she got home was brief and breezy before she launched into a detailed description of the resort's spa packages. The cruelty wasn't always financial. Sometimes it was small and personal, designed to reinforce his status. For his 40th birthday, Bernice had made a grand show of giving him a gift at their weekly Sunday dinner. It was a long, thin box wrapped in cheap paper. Inside was a tie, a polyester, navy blue tie that looked like it had come from a discount store. It couldn't have cost more than $40. "For the distinguished businessman," she'd said with a saccharine smile. Roland had thanked her, his voice tight. The next day, while picking up a part from a dealership near the Summit, a high-end outdoor mall in Birmingham, he saw them. Bernice and Tamika gliding out of the Chanel boutique, laughing. Tamika was carrying a brand new quilted leather Chanel bag, a purchase that easily cost $4,000. The image of the cheap tie and the expensive handbag burned itself into his memory. The final, irrevocable break in his denial came a few months later. A letter arrived from their mortgage company. It was a confirmation of a cash-out refinance on their home. He stared at the document, his blood running cold. They had pulled $50,000 in equity out of the house. He remembered signing some initial paperwork a few weeks back, something Tamika had rushed in front of him, saying it was just to lock in a lower interest rate. He had trusted her. He hadn't read the fine print. He confronted her that night, his voice dangerously quiet. "Tamika, why did we pull $50,000 out of the house?" She didn't even have the grace to look guilty. She looked annoyed, as if he'd caught her in a trivial social lie. "Oh, it's for an investment. Bernice's holding company needed a quick capital infusion for a new acquisition. It's just short term. We'll get it back, with interest." "Bernice's company?" Roland repeated, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. "You took equity from our home, the home I make the payments on, and gave it to your mother for one of her schemes?" "It's not a scheme, Roland. It's a business," she snapped, her voice rising. "Something you wouldn't understand. Why are you so obsessed with every single dollar? It's suffocating." He just looked at her. He saw a stranger. The woman he loved was gone, replaced by this cold, dismissive person who viewed him not as a partner, but as a resource to be exploited. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He simply turned and walked away. The fight was over. Not just the argument, but the entire fight for his marriage. In that moment, he accepted the truth. His father had been right all along, and the grief he felt wasn't just for his marriage. It was for his own willful blindness. He had been a fool, but he wouldn't be one for a moment longer. The package arrived on a Tuesday night. The time was 9:17 p.m. Rain lashed against the windows of his father's small house, a mournful, rhythmic drumming that matched the heavy beat of Roland's own heart. He had been methodically working his way through a stack of his father's mail, mostly junk and bills he'd already arranged to have paid. Then he saw it. A thick 9x12 manila envelope, heavier than the rest. The address was written in his father's unmistakable hand, sharp, precise, slightly slanted cursive, penned with a black felt-tip pen. It was postmarked 2 days before Marcus had died. A chill that had nothing to do with the rainy night crawled up Roland's spine. He took the envelope to the kitchen table, the one where he'd eaten countless bowls of cereal as a boy, while his father read the morning paper. He slid it open carefully with a butter knife. There was no letter inside, no note of explanation. There was only a stack of documents, at least an inch thick, held together by a large black binder clip. The top page was a printout from the Alabama Secretary of State website. It was the Articles of Incorporation for a limited liability company. B Enterprises, LLC, it read. The registered agent and sole member was listed as Bernice Franklin, his mother-in-law. Roland's breath caught in his throat. He flipped to the next section. It was a series of bank statements. Not his, not Tamika's personal accounts. They were statements for the primary operating account of his business, Williams Autocraft. His father had taken a ruler and a red pen and drawn neat boxes around certain transactions. They started 6 years ago, just 3 months after his wedding. The first one was for $2,500. The memo line read, "Consulting fee." Roland's hands began to tremble. He slowly turned the pages. Every quarter, like clockwork, there was a transfer. The amounts varied. Sometimes $2,500, sometimes $5,000, once a staggering $15,000. The memo lines were always bland and corporate. Asset lease, strategic services, management retainer. In his father's neat script, written in the margins next to each highlighted transaction, were the same 2 words, "No services rendered." He felt a wave of nausea. This was his money. Money he had bled for, sweat for. Money that should have gone to a new frame machine, to employee bonuses, to a new roof for the shop. Instead, it had been siphoned away. A quiet, steady drain he had never noticed. He kept turning the pages, watching the dates advance and the total grow. His father had kept a running tally at the bottom of each page. $22,000, $47,500, $98,000. The final page was a summary sheet, a simple piece of ledger paper filled with his father's calculations. The final number was circled twice in red ink, $186,450.22. The air rushed out of Roland's lungs. $186,000? Stolen from him. One consulting fee at a time. It was the down payment for the new Garmat paint booth. It was years of security. It was his future, liquidated and transferred into his mother-in-law's holding company. The phrase from the patio echoed in his mind. "He's just the wallet, sweetie." He felt a surge of white-hot rage, so intense it made him dizzy. He wanted to scream, to break something, to drive to Mountain Brook and kick down the door of that colonial mansion. But then his eyes fell on the last document in the stack, set apart from the others. It was different. It was a carbon copy of a UCC-1 financing statement filed with the state 3 years prior. The form was dense with legal text, but his father had highlighted the key sections. Debtor, Williams Autocraft, 451 Industrial Boulevard, Ensley, Alabama. Secured party, Marcus Williams. Roland's eyes scanned the collateral description. It was a long, detailed list. 1. Chief EZ Liner, 2 Frame Machine, serial number CH-89330. 1. ProSpot PR-5, Welder, serial number PS-201104. All shoplifts, compressors, tool chests, hand tools, diagnostic equipment, and the Garmat downdraft paint booth, serial number GM-75021. It was everything, every significant piece of equipment in his shop, the very heart of his business. Taped to the bottom of the form was a small, folded piece of paper. It was the only personal note in the entire package. Roland unfolded it with shaking fingers. His father's handwriting was a little less steady here, as if written in a hurry. "Son, he who files first wins. This is your leverage. The assets are secured in my name. I have already executed a transfer of the security interest to you effective upon my death. The document is with my attorney. They think they own the business. They only own the name and the debt. The heart of it is yours. Don't get angry. Get smart. They'll never see it coming. Love, Dad." Roland stared at the note. The rain outside a distant, muffled sound. The rage that had consumed him moments before receded, replaced by a profound, aching grief and an even more profound sense of awe. His father had seen it all. While Roland was busy being the happy husband, his father had been the silent guardian, the retired paralegal pulling one last brilliant legal maneuver from the shadows. He hadn't just given Roland a warning, he had given him a weapon, a perfectly legal, perfectly documented ironclad ace in the hole. The tears that finally came were not of anger or sadness, but of a deep, heartbreaking gratitude. He wasn't alone in this fight after all. His father was still with him, his quiet wisdom reaching out from beyond the grave. The name on his father's note was David Chen. The law firm Chen and Associates occupied the top 2 floors of a glass tower downtown, a building that seemed to scrape the clouds. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and hushed importance. Roland, in his best slacks and a blazer that suddenly felt too small, felt like a man visiting a foreign country. He clutched the manila envelope his father had sent him like a passport. David Chen's office had a panoramic view of Birmingham. He was a sharp, impeccably dressed man in his 50s, with eyes that missed nothing. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Your father was a good man, Mr. Williams," he said, gesturing for Roland to sit. "And the best paralegal I ever worked with. He told me you might be calling one day. I'm sorry for your loss. He said you'd have a package for me." Roland slid the envelope across the vast, polished mahogany desk. The desk alone probably cost more than his Camry. Chen opened it and began to read. For 20 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper. Roland watched his face. It moved from grim concentration to a flicker of professional outrage, and finally, to a slow, spreading look of deep, profound respect. When he got to the UCC1 filing, Chen let out a low whistle. He leaned back in his $3,000 Herman Miller chair and looked at Roland. "Your father was a legal artist," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "A Rembrandt with paperwork. This is magnificent." "Is it enough?" Roland asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Enough?" Chen laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Mr. Williams, this is a checkmate. They don't know it yet, but they've been playing a game that was already over 3 years ago." He leaned forward, his demeanor shifting from admiring colleague to predatory lawyer. His rate, he explained, was $750 an hour, but he was confident this wouldn't be a protracted fight. "The beauty of what your father did is its simplicity. Bernice and your wife created an LLC. They've been funneling your shop's revenue into it under the guise of fake fees. Their goal, I assume, is to build up the LLC's paper value, using your very real cash flow, and then sell the entire LLC to a third party. The buyer would think they're acquiring a profitable auto body business." "That's what I figured," Roland said, the pieces clicking into place. "Here's what they don't know," Chen continued, tapping the UCC filing. "Your father, as a creditor, filed a lien against every single piece of valuable, tangible equipment in your shop. The lifts, the welders, the frame machine, the things that actually make the business a business. He then executed a private document, which I have in my safe, transferring that security interest to you upon his death. That makes you the sole secured creditor. You are first in line. Your claim predates any claim their LLC has on those assets." He paused, letting the weight of it sink in. "So B Enterprises, LLC, it owns a lease on a building. It owns the name Williams Autocraft. It owns a mountain of fabricated invoices. But the heart of the business, the actual machinery worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, it doesn't own a single bolt. The LLC is a ghost, a hollow shell. They're trying to sell a car with no engine." A cold, clean wave of relief washed over Roland. "So what do we do?" "Nothing," Chen said, a thin, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "We do absolutely nothing. We wait. They are confident, arrogant. They believe you are, in your father's words, a simple man. They will make a move. They will find a buyer for their worthless LLC. And when they go to closing, they will discover that they have nothing to sell. We don't have to throw a punch. We just have to let them walk into the wall your father built." The plan was as brutal as it was elegant. They would need to be patient. Chen advised Roland to open a new private bank account at a different bank. He also had Roland sign the documents that officially put the security interest from Marcus into his name, and they filed the update with the state that same day. It was a simple administrative step, but it was the final piece of the puzzle. "Go home, Mr. Williams," Chen said, standing to shake his hand. "Act normal. Be the man they think you are. Go to work, fix cars, come home tired. Let them think they have all the power. Pride, as they say, comes before the fall, and in this case, the fall will be from a very great height." Roland walked out of the glass tower and into the afternoon sun. The air felt different, lighter. For the first time in years, the gnawing anxiety in his gut was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. He wasn't a victim anymore. He was a strategist. He was his father's son. He got into his old Camry, the engine turning over with a familiar, comforting rumble. He had a role to play, and he would play it to perfection. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in self-control. Roland entered a state of emotional hibernation, a quiet, methodical performance of normalcy. On the outside, he was the same man. He left for the shop at 6:30 a.m., came home covered in a day's hard work, and listened with feigned interest as Tamika detailed her increasingly extravagant life. Inside, he was a block of ice. The love he'd felt for her, the warmth, the affection. It had all vanished, replaced by a chilling, watchful detachment. Each lie he told, each nod of agreement, was a scene in a play only he and his late father understood. The first test came that Friday night. Tamika was giddy, floating around the kitchen as she plated a takeout dinner from an expensive new restaurant. "You are not going to believe the news," she chirped, her eyes sparkling. "Bernice got the most amazing offer on one of her properties, a big auto group from Atlanta. They're serious. We're going to be set, baby. Truly set." Roland knew exactly what property she was talking about. It was his shop, his life's work. The old Roland would have been confused, then hurt. The new Roland simply picked up a fork. "That's great news, Tamika," he said, his voice even and calm. "I'm happy for her." He took a bite of the $60 sea bass. It tasted like ash, but he chewed and swallowed. "She works hard on her investments." Tamika beamed, completely oblivious. "She does. See? I told you you'd understand. This is what we've been building towards." "We," she kept saying. The word was a dagger, but he didn't flinch. He just nodded and asked about her day. The ease with which the lie came to his lips scared him a little, but it also empowered him. He was no longer her pawn. He was a mirror, reflecting the person she wanted him to be. The next morning, a Saturday, he went to the shop. He told Tamika he needed to catch up on paperwork. Instead, he walked the silent floor with a clipboard and a copy of the UCC filing David Chen had given him. He went from bay to bay, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He ran his hand over the cool, painted steel of the chief frame machine, a $40,000 piece of equipment he'd saved for 3 years. He checked the serial number against the one on the list, a perfect match. He did the same for the Pro Spot welder, the Hunter alignment rack, the 2 rotary lifts, the massive Ingersoll Rand compressor that was the lungs of the entire operation. Everything, down to the $15,000 set of snap-on tool chests, was on his father's list. It was a tangible accounting of his own sweat equity. As he stood in the center of the quiet shop, surrounded by the tools of his trade, he felt a profound sense of ownership he hadn't felt in years. This was his, not theirs. His. His performance at home became flawless. He learned to filter their conversations, listening for keywords: due diligence, closing date, wire transfer. He pieced together their entire plan from overheard snippets of phone calls and careless dinner table chatter. Tamika and Bernice were careless, buoyed by arrogance. They believed he was too simple to notice, too beaten down to care. One evening, he was in the garage, changing the oil in his Camry, when Tamika came out, her phone pressed to her ear. She didn't see him in the dim light. "No, the lawyers are handling all the financials," she was saying to Bernice. "The buyers are doing their final walkthrough of the asset on Thursday. Everything is on track for the closing on Friday morning." She paused, listening. "Don't worry about Roland. He hasn't said a word. He's completely in the dark. Honestly, I think he's relieved he doesn't have to worry about the business anymore." Roland froze, his hand tightening on the wrench. Relieved? They thought he was relieved to have his life's work stolen from him. The sheer, breathtaking condescension of it almost made him stand up and scream, but he didn't. He took a slow, deep breath, the smell of oil and steel filling his lungs. He remembered David Chen's words, "Let them walk into the wall your father built." He stayed crouched in the shadows, listening until she went back inside. They had no idea what was coming. The wall was waiting. He found more evidence of their deception in the mail, a credit card statement addressed to Tamika that she'd carelessly left on the counter. He glanced at it. A $2,400 charge at Burberry, a $1,800 charge at a luxury spa, and then a charge that made his blood run cold, a $1,500 payment to a corporate services firm. He recognized the name from the LLC documents his father had sent. They were using his money, funneled through credit cards he paid off, to maintain the very legal entity they were using to defraud him. Each lie, each overheard conversation, each piece of evidence wasn't just fuel for his anger. It was a stone in the foundation of his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for his money or his shop anymore. He was fighting for his dignity. He was fighting for his father's memory. He was playing the part of the fool, but for the first time in his life, he felt like the smartest man in the room. Friday morning, 10 o'clock sharp. The air in the conference room on the 25th floor of the Regions Harbert Plaza was thick with the scent of expensive leather and the low hum of impending commerce. This was the closing, the final act. Roland wasn't there, but David Chen had arranged for a trusted paralegal from his firm to be present as an observer, and she was feeding him a play-by-play via text. Roland sat in his small office at the shop, the door locked, his phone in his hand, his heart hammering against his ribs. Chen's paralegal, a woman named Maria, was a master of descriptive brevity. 9:58 a.m. They're here. Bernice in a power suit. Looks like an evil queen. Tamika beside her glowing. Both look like they just won the lottery. The suit, Roland knew from a discarded receipt, was an $8,700 Armani. 10:01 a.m. Buyers are here. 2 men. Atlanta Auto Group. Look serious. Lawyers all shaking hands. Lots of fake smiles. 10:05 a.m. They're seated. Piles of documents on the table. Bernice looks smug. She just made a joke about celebrating in Paris. Tamika laughed. Roland stared at the phone, his knuckles white. He could picture the scene perfectly. The long, polished table. The skyline of Birmingham visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The absolute, unshakable confidence of the 2 women who had systematically dismantled his life. 10:12 a.m. Title agent is here. Sarah Collins. Quiet woman. She's spreading her files out. Buyer's attorney is making small talk. Bernice is checking her makeup in a compact mirror. This was it. The title agent was the key. She was the independent third party whose only job was to ensure the asset being sold, in this case the LLC that supposedly owned the shop, had a clean title, free of any claims or liens. 10:18 a.m. Buyer's lawyer says, "Well, Sarah, if your report is clean, I think we're ready to sign and wire these funds." He's holding a pen. Roland held his breath. His phone was silent for what felt like an eternity. He imagined the quiet shuffling of papers. The anticipation in the room. 10:20 a.m. She spoke. 10:20 a.m. Oh my God. The silence in here is deafening. Roland's phone buzzed again. 10:21 a.m. Sarah Collins just said, "Actually, there is one issue." He could almost hear the record scratch. 10:21 a.m. A primary lien was recorded against all tangible assets of Williams Autocraft, the supposed primary holding of B Enterprises, LLC. The lien predates the formation of the LLC itself. Maria's texts came in a flood. 10:22 a.m. Bernice's face. It's gone completely white, like a sheet. Her lawyer is frowning. What? That's impossible. We ran a search. 10:23 a.m. Sarah slides a document across the table. The lien was properly filed with the Secretary of State 3 years ago. UCC1 financing statement. It appears your search was limited to the LLC, not the underlying assets it claimed to control. 10:24 a.m. Buyer's attorney picked up the document. He's reading it. His eyes are wide. 10:25 a.m. Bernice is sputtering. This is a mistake, a clerical error. Tamika is just staring at the paper, her mouth half open. Roland felt a tremor run through him, a release of pressure that had been building for months. He could see it. He could feel the oxygen being sucked out of that room. 10:26 a.m. Buyer's attorney puts the paper down. He looks at Bernice's lawyer. Who is the secured party on this lien? 10:27 a.m. Sarah Collins. The original secured party was a Mr. Marcus Williams. The interest was legally transferred to his son, Mr. Roland Williams, upon his death. The name, his name, dropped like a bomb onto that polished table. 10:28 a.m. Tamika made a sound, a little gasp. All color has drained from her face. She's looking at Bernice. Bernice is staring at the title agent like she wants her to combust. 10:29 a.m. The buyer, the main guy, is reading the collateral list attached to the lien. He looks up. His face is like stone. This list, it's the entire shop. The frame machine, the welders, the paint booth, it's everything. 10:30 a.m. Bernice's lawyer is sweating. This is outrageous. We will contest this. 10:31 a.m. Buyer's lawyer just laughed. A cold, sharp sound. Contest it all you want, the lien is valid, which means the LLC we are moments away from purchasing for $250,000 has an asset value of, let me see, 0. The finality of that word, 0. 10:32 a.m. The buyers are standing up, they're packing their briefcases. The main guy looks at Bernice. His voice is ice cold. This meeting is over. You have fraudulently misrepresented the assets of this sale. You will be hearing from our legal department regarding the recovery of our $25,000 due diligence fee. And I'd advise you not to do business in this state again. 10:33 a.m. They're gone. The room was silent. Roland stared at the last text, the words blurring slightly. They were gone. The deal was dead. The trap, so carefully set by his father, had sprung. 10:35 a.m. Bernice just turned on Tamika. Her voice is a whisper, but it's more terrifying than a scream. What did you do? Tamika is shaking her head, whispering his name over and over. Roland. It was Roland. It was his father. 10:37 a.m. They're leaving. Bernice isn't looking at anyone. Her face is a mask of pure fury. Tamika is crying, silently, just tears streaming down her face. Roland put the phone down on his desk. He leaned back in his worn office chair and looked out the window at the grime and glory of his Ensley shop. A quiet, profound calm settled over him. It wasn't the giddy thrill of victory. It was the solemn, grounding feeling of justice. The wall his father had built stood tall, and they had walked right into it at full speed. The collapse was not a single event, but a cascade of failures, each one triggering the next. The consequences unraveled with the same methodical precision his father had used to document their crimes. Roland didn't have to lift a finger. He simply had to watch as the world they had built on a foundation of lies crumbled into dust. The first consequence was immediate and public. The two buyers from the Atlanta Auto Group were well connected. Within hours, the story of the disastrous closing was whispered through the tight-knit circles of Birmingham's legal and business communities. The narrative was brutal. Bernice Franklin, the self-styled investment guru of Mountain Brook, had been caught attempting to sell a worthless shell company in a clear act of fraud. Her reputation, the currency she valued above all else, was instantly incinerated. The second consequence arrived via courier the following Monday. A letter from the buyer's law firm, addressed to B Enterprises, LLC, care of Bernice Franklin. It was a formal demand for the immediate repayment of their $25,000 due diligence fee and stated their intent to file a civil suit for fraudulent misrepresentation, seeking punitive damages to the tune of $100,000. Bernice, who had built her empire on bluff and intimidation, was now facing a legal battle with a corporate entity that had infinitely deeper pockets. The third consequence was delivered by David Chen. The day after the failed closing, he filed for divorce on Roland's behalf. The petition was concise and devastating, citing irreconcilable differences and gross financial misconduct. He simultaneously filed an emergency injunction, freezing the accounts of Williams Autocraft and placing the business into a temporary receivership controlled by the court, effectively cutting off Tamika and Bernice's access to any more of its funds. The wallet was officially closed. Then came the voicemails. Tamika's emotional state and her slow dawning comprehension of the catastrophe was chronicled in a series of increasingly desperate messages left on Roland's phone, which he let go to voicemail every time. Voicemail 1, Friday, 2:15 p.m. Confused, annoyed tone. Roland, call me. The closing was a disaster. There's some kind of mistake with the paperwork, some lien from your father. It's a mess. My mother is furious. Call me so we can figure out how to fix this. Voicemail 2, Friday, 8:47 p.m. Angry, shrill. I can't believe you did this. David Chen just sent me divorce papers. Are you insane? After everything we built? That was our money. My mother's money. You have no right to do this. Voicemail 3, Saturday, 11:02 a.m. Pleading, voice cracking. Okay, Roland, I'm sorry. I should have told you more about the business plan. I see that now, but this is not the way. We can fix this. Please, just talk to me. Don't throw everything away. Voicemail 4, Sunday, 4:30 p.m. A new voice. Cold, reptilian fury. It was Bernice. You think you're clever, don't you, you little grease monkey? You and your dead father? You are nothing. You live in a world of dirt and noise. You have just made an enemy of a very powerful woman. You will regret this for the rest of your miserable life. Voicemail 5, Monday, 9:20 p.m. Tamika again, but this time all the fight was gone. Just hollow sobs. Please, Roland, please. They're going to sue us. We have to sell the house. Mama said? She said I have nothing. She said I'm on my own. I have nothing, Roland. Please? He saved every single one. They were a testament, a final accounting of their true character when the facade was stripped away. The enumeration of their losses was stark and quantifiable. 1. The $250,000 sale, gone, vanished into thin air. 2. Bernice's LLC, rendered completely worthless. Its only asset was a commercial lease that was now a liability. 3. The Mountain Brook house. To cover the initial legal fees for the impending fraud lawsuit, and to pay back the $50,000 they had fraudulently pulled from the mortgage. Qui premia le coin, Bernice was forced to put her $1.2 million colonial on the market in a panic. It sold quickly, but for significantly under market value, netting her far less than she'd hoped after all debts were cleared. 4. Tamika's future. The divorce was swift and brutal. The evidence of financial fraud was so overwhelming that the judge nullified any claim she might have had to the business or Roland's future earnings. She walked away with half the value of their furniture and her designer clothes. Her Chanel handbags and Burberry dresses couldn't pay the rent. She ended up in a cramped, $1,200 a month apartment in Homewood, forced to get a job as a hostess at a restaurant, a job she considered beneath her. 5. Roland's shop. After a short, court-mandated period, full and unencumbered control of Williams' autocraft was returned to Roland. The UCC lien his father had created was satisfied, and the title to all his equipment was now solely and indisputably his. He sat one evening in the quiet of his father's house, which he had decided to keep, and looked at the list of consequences. He felt no joy, no thrill of victory, just a quiet, somber sense of order being restored. The scales, so long tipped in their favor, had finally been balanced. It was the consequence of their own choices, a debt coming due. He had not sought revenge. He had simply demanded accountability. And in the end, that was far more devastating. 1 year later, the Saturday morning sun streamed through the large open bay doors of the shop in Ensley, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny diamonds. The scent was the same, a familiar, comforting mix of primer, steel, and hard work. But everything else was different. The old, faded sign that had read Williams Autocraft was gone, replaced by a freshly painted one in bold, clean letters of royal blue and white. It read, Marcus and Son Automotive Restoration. Roland, his deep brown skin luminous in the morning light, leaned over the fender of a '68 Mustang. He wasn't alone. Beside him stood a lanky 17-year-old named Jamal, his brow furrowed in concentration as he held a sanding block. Easy now, Roland said, his voice calm and steady. Let the paper do the work. Long, smooth strokes. You're not trying to punish the metal, you're trying to guide it. Jamal nodded, his movements becoming more fluid, more confident. He was one of 5 teenagers in the shop that morning, all part of the new Saturday Apprentice program Roland had started. Every weekend, from 9 to noon, he opened his doors to kids from the neighborhood, teaching them the trade his father had taught him the value of. It was free. The only price of admission was a willingness to learn and to respect the craft. His life had found a new rhythm. He lived in his father's house now, the small brick bungalow feeling less like a place of grief and more like a sanctuary. He had filled the silence with the quiet hum of a life rebuilt on his own terms. His wealth was no longer measured by bank statements or the ambitions of others. It was measured in the crisp line of a perfectly prepped body panel, in the spark of understanding in a young apprentice's eyes, in the quiet satisfaction of a day's honest labor. He was still a man who made $63,000 a year, but he had never felt richer. He had one last piece of business to attend to. A few months after the divorce was finalized, he'd received a letter. It was from Tamika, a real letter, written on simple stationery. It was short, stripped of all her usual drama and flair. It was an apology, a real one. She wrote about her mother, about the pressure to acquire, to ascend, and how she had lost herself in the process. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for anything. She just said she was sorry for what she had done to him, and to the memory of the man he had been. Roland had agreed to meet her for coffee, not for a reconciliation, but for a closure. They met at a simple Starbucks on Lexington, a neutral ground far from the ghosts of Mountain Brook. She looked different, smaller. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by a simple dress. The defiant spark in her eyes had been replaced by a weary humility. They talked for an hour. He listened more than he spoke. He saw not the predator his father had warned him about, but a woman finally grappling with the consequences of her choices. When it was time to leave, he stood up. "I forgive you, Tamika," he said, and the words were true. It wasn't for her, it was for him. It was the final heavy stone he needed to set down so he could walk away freely. "I hope you find what you're looking for." She had just nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, Roland." He never saw her again. Now, in the sun-drenched bay of his shop, he watched Jamal finish the fender. The boy stepped back, a proud smile on his face. "How's that, Mr. Williams?" Roland ran his hand over the surface. It was smooth as glass. "That's perfect, son," he said. "Absolutely perfect." He realized then that his father's true gift wasn't the UCC lean or the legal strategy. It was the quiet example of a man who understood the nature of true wealth. It isn't something you can acquire or steal. It's not found in a sprawling house or a luxury car. True wealth is the skill in your hands, the integrity in your heart, and the legacy you build for those who come after you. It's what you create and what you give back. It's the and son in Marcus and Son. We all face moments that define us, moments where we must choose between what is easy and what is right. What choices have made you who you are today? Join the conversation in the comments below, subscribe to Love Beyond Pride, and let's continue to share stories of strength, justice, and the quiet triumph of character.